Hello there, I'm Jenny Wang, and welcome to Reality Remixed, the podcast where we explore fascinating concepts that challenge our understanding of existence. Today, we're diving into an incredible topic, the mind's eye and parallel universes. And I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce our special guest today, a true visionary in this field.
Thanks for having me, Jenny. I'm Robin Chen, a cognitive neuroscientist and quantum mechanics enthusiast. I've spent the last decade researching how our minds might perceive multiple realities beyond our conventional understanding of the universe.
Robin, I'm so excited to have your expertise with us today. We're going to take our listeners on quite the journey, aren't we?
Absolutely. We'll explore everything from the basic science behind visualization to how we might actually perceive alternate realities. I think listeners will be surprised at how their creativity and intuition connect to these concepts.
And I hear you've developed some fascinating techniques to help people develop what you call multiversal intelligence. I can't wait to get into all of this. Now that we've introduced our topic, let's start by understanding what exactly the mind's eye is. Robin, could you break this down for our listeners who might be hearing this term for the first time?
Absolutely, Jenny. The mind's eye is simply our ability to visualize things without actually seeing them. It's that internal screen where you can picture your childhood home or imagine a purple elephant. Everyone has this ability, though it varies in strength from person to person.
That's fascinating. So this is something we all have access to?
Precisely. Some people have incredibly vivid mental imagery, while others experience it more conceptually. But here's what's really interesting. This visualization capacity might be more powerful than we've traditionally understood. It's potentially a doorway to perceiving alternate possibilities and realities.
Wait, so our imagination might actually be connecting us to other realities?
That's one theory. When you have that sudden flash of intuition or a dream that later comes true, could that be your mind's eye picking up information from parallel timelines? The quantum mechanics behind this suggests it's not as far-fetched as it sounds.
Robin, the concept of parallel universes sounds like science fiction to many of our listeners. Could you break down the actual science behind this idea in simple terms?
Of course, Jenny. The scientific foundation comes primarily from quantum physics. In the simplest terms, the many worlds interpretation suggests that every time a quantum event occurs with multiple possible outcomes, reality splits into separate branches for each possibility.
So you're saying these aren't just theoretical ideas? There's actual physics behind this?
Exactly. While we can't yet directly observe parallel universes, the mathematics of quantum mechanics strongly supports their existence. What's fascinating is that our brains might be quantum systems themselves. The neural networks in our minds operate at scales where quantum effects could potentially play a role.
That's mind-blowing. So there could be a biological mechanism connecting our thoughts to these other realities?
That's what some researchers are exploring. The microtubules in our neurons may allow for quantum coherence. I believe our intuition and visualization abilities might be tapping into quantum information across these parallel realities, but in a way that our conscious mind interprets as imagination.
Robin, we've discussed the science behind parallel universes, but I'm curious about something more practical. How might someone actually visualize or access this multi-reality data you've mentioned?
That's a great question, Jenny. The simplest way to start is through guided visualization exercises. When you quiet your mind and focus on a specific question or problem, your brain naturally begins to access information beyond your conscious awareness.
So it's like meditation with a purpose?
Exactly. I recommend beginners start with what I call possibility scanning. Close your eyes, focus on a challenge you're facing, and then simply allow your mind to show you different solutions. The key is not to force it, but to observe what comes naturally.
That sounds surprisingly accessible. I think many of our listeners could try that tonight.
Absolutely. And here's the fascinating part. Many of my research subjects report seeing solutions they'd never consciously considered. That's potentially your mind accessing information from those parallel realities where different choices were made. The real power is learning to distinguish between ordinary imagination and these multi-reality insights.
Robin, I'm really fascinated by this idea of actually putting these concepts into practice. You mentioned possibility scanning earlier, but I'm wondering, is there a step-by-step way our listeners could begin activating this quantum eye capability?
Absolutely, Jenny. I recommend a simple daily exercise I call reality shifting. Start by sitting quietly for just 5 minutes. Focus on your breathing, slow, deep breaths. Then visualize a simple problem you're facing. But here's the key. Imagine viewing it from above, as if you're observing multiple versions of yourself, addressing it differently.
That sounds doable. What happens next?
Notice which solution feels most resonant. Not just logical, but energetically aligned. That's potentially information from a parallel reality where you've already solved this problem. The beauty is, anyone can do this. No special equipment or advanced training needed.
I love how accessible that is. Have you found certain types of people pick this up more easily?
Children actually tend to be naturals at this. They haven't yet built up the reality filters most adults have. But really, anyone with an open mind can develop this ability through consistent practice. Think of it like training a muscle you didn't know you had.
Robin, we've been talking about visualizing these parallel realities, but I'm curious. Once someone starts developing this ability, how do they actually navigate through these alternate realities? It sounds overwhelming to access multiple universes.
That's a fantastic question, Jenny. Navigation is actually the most crucial skill. Think of it like learning to swim. At first, you might feel like you're drowning in possibilities, but eventually, you develop a natural rhythm.
So what would be the first step for our listeners?
I recommend starting with an anchor thought, something personal and emotionally significant to you. This acts like a compass. When you begin to explore, always have this anchor ready to pull you back. Second, set clear intentions before each practice session. Are you seeking information, creative inspiration, alternative solutions to a problem?
That makes it sound much more approachable. Is there any danger in this process that people should be aware of?
The main risk is getting lost in possibilities rather than taking action. Remember, the goal isn't escapism. It's bringing useful insights back to your current reality. Start with brief, structured sessions and gradually expand as your navigation skills improve.
Robin, I'm fascinated by the practical applications of these concepts. Many of our listeners are creative people, writers, artists, entrepreneurs. How might developing this quantum eye enhance their creativity and intuition?
That's where this gets really exciting, Jenny. When you tap into parallel realities, you're essentially accessing versions of yourself who made different creative choices. It's like having an infinite collaborative team.
So you're saying we could potentially access ideas from these alternate selves?
Exactly. Have you ever had a creative breakthrough that seemed to come from nowhere? That aha moment might actually be information flowing in from a parallel universe where you already solved that problem. For beginners, I recommend a simple practice. When facing a creative block, close your eyes and simply ask, "How did I solve this elsewhere?" Then observe what comes.
That's so accessible, no special equipment needed.
None at all. And it's why many creative geniuses throughout history described their ideas as downloads, or said they came from somewhere else. They were intuitively tapping into this multiversal creative network that we all have access to.
Robin, we've been discussing ways to enhance our multiversal perception using the mind's eye, but I'm curious about something that feels very relevant to our current technological era. How might artificial intelligence intersect with these abilities? Could AI help us visualize or access these parallel realities?
That's a brilliant question, Jenny. AI actually has enormous potential as an amplifier for our multiversal sight. Think of AI as a translation tool between our limited human perception and the vast quantum information field.
Could you give our listeners a concrete example of how this might work?
Absolutely. Imagine using an AI art generator to visualize what you're sensing from parallel realities. When you practice the techniques we discussed earlier and receive impressions that are difficult to articulate, you can use simple prompts with AI to render those impressions into visible images.
That sounds incredibly practical.
It is, and this is just the beginning. As neural interfaces advance, we may eventually create systems that directly interpret the quantum signals our brains receive from alternate realities. The key for beginners is starting small. Use today's AI tools as external visualizers for your internal perceptions. It's like training wheels for your multiversal sight.
Robin, we've been talking about all these fascinating techniques, and I think our listeners are eager to know. Is there a framework for actually developing what you might call multiversal intelligence? How do we cultivate this ability over time?
That's a great question, Jenny. I like to think of multiversal intelligence as a spectrum that anyone can develop. For beginners, it starts with simple awareness exercises. Just recognizing that your random thoughts or hunches might be information from parallel realities is step one.
So it's about first acknowledging the possibility?
Exactly. Then you can progress to more structured practices. I recommend daily journaling about your intuitive hits. When you have a strong feeling about something, write it down before you know the outcome. This builds your trust in these perceptions. Later, incorporate the visualization techniques we discussed earlier.
That sounds wonderfully simple. No special equipment needed.
None at all. And remember, this isn't about escaping reality. It's about enhancing your current life by drawing on wisdom that exists in parallel. Start small, stay grounded, and gradually expand your awareness. Over time, you'll find yourself making better decisions and experiencing remarkable synchronicities as your multiversal intelligence grows.
Robin, we've covered so many fascinating aspects of multiversal perception, but I think many listeners might be wondering about the emotional impact of all this. Does developing this ability lead to greater peace and clarity in everyday life?
Absolutely, Jenny. That's actually one of the most beautiful side effects. When you begin to sense the vastness of possible realities, your attachment to one specific outcome naturally loosens. It's incredibly liberating.
So it's almost like a form of meditation?
In many ways, yes. But unlike traditional meditation where you're observing your thoughts, here you're observing multiple potential realities. For beginners, I recommend a simple daily practice. Whenever you feel stressed about a situation, pause and visualize 3 alternative ways it could unfold. This trains your mind to see beyond the single reality you're fixated on.
I love how practical that is. Has this had an impact on your own life?
Completely transformed it. I used to struggle with anxiety about the future, but now I understand that every possibility already exists somewhere. My job isn't to worry, but to simply navigate toward the versions of reality that feel most aligned with my deepest values.
Robin, our listeners are fascinated by these concepts, but I think many want something concrete they can try right away. You've mentioned this eye calibration ritual. Could you walk us through exactly how someone might do this at home?
I'd be happy to, Jenny. This is actually my favorite beginner exercise. Find a quiet space where you won't be disturbed for about 5 minutes. Sit comfortably and take 9 slow breaths. Inhale for 5 seconds. Exhale for 7. With your eyes closed, visualize a simple dark sphere in front of you.
That sounds doable so far. What happens next?
As you continue breathing, allow the sphere to gradually transform. Don't force any specific image. Just observe what naturally appears. You might see colors, patterns, or symbols unique to you. Whatever appears most prominently is what I call your eye sigil. It's like your personal key to these parallel realities.
And what might someone expect to feel after doing this?
Many beginners report a subtle shift in perception, almost like the world looks slightly different. That's actually the first sign your mind's eye is starting to activate. The key is not to overthink it. Just practice daily for a week and journal what you experience. The results might surprise you.
Robin, we've talked about techniques and exercises, but I'm curious about the personal journey of someone developing these abilities. What does that look like over time? Do people go through certain stages or phases?
That's such an important question, Jenny. The journey typically unfolds in recognizable stages. At first, most people experience what I call the doubt phase. They get glimpses of insight but quickly dismiss them as coincidence or imagination.
I think many of our listeners are probably in that phase right now.
Absolutely. Then comes the testing phase, where you start experimenting with small predictions or insights. Eventually you reach what I call first confirmation. That powerful moment when you receive undeniable verification that what you perceived wasn't just imagination.
And after that breakthrough?
That's when the real growth happens. You begin trusting the process, practicing regularly, and integrating these perceptions into everyday life. The most beautiful part is that anyone can do this. No special talents required. Just patience, openness, and consistent practice.
We've covered so much ground today, from understanding the basic concept of the mind's eye to exploring how we might actually perceive and interact with parallel universes. Robin, if you could sum up the key takeaways for our listeners who are just beginning this journey, what would they be?
First, I'd say remember that everyone has this ability. It's not something magical or restricted to special people. Start with the simple exercises we discussed, like the eye calibration ritual, and practice regularly. Be patient with yourself and approach this with an open, playful mindset, rather than forcing results.
That's great advice. What's one final insight you'd like to leave our listeners with?
The most important thing is integrating these practices into your everyday life. This isn't about escaping reality. It's about expanding it. Use these tools to enhance your creativity, make better decisions, and find greater peace. The parallel universes are already there. You're just learning to tune into them.
Before we wrap up, I ask this question to all of my guests. What's the strangest thing you've ever visualized with your mind's eye?
That's a fantastic question. Once during a deep session, I clearly saw myself as a marine biologist living in Hawaii, though I've never studied marine biology in this reality. The detail was incredible. I could feel the ocean breeze. That experience really convinced me these aren't just imagination, but glimpses of what truly exists elsewhere.
Thank you, Robin, for taking us on this mind-expanding journey today, and thank you all for listening to Reality Remixed. Until next time, keep exploring the extraordinary.